You've probably seen it. It's a thought experiment from Ricky Gervais that's gone absolutely viral, seen by millions. It gets pitched as atheism in a nutshell, right? A super slick, clever argument that seems to just slice science and religion into two totally separate boxes. But today, we're going to put it under the microscope. Does it actually hold up? Is this really a checkmate, or is there a lot more going on here? Let's get into it.
So this is the big idea right here. And you got to admit, it's powerful, it's catchy, and when you first hear it, it sounds, well, pretty darn convincing. But here's the thing our sources point out. The second you actually lean on this argument, it just crumbles. It completely falls apart. So let's really dig into this viral claim and see exactly how critics have taken it apart piece by piece.
All right, here's how we're going to do this. First, we'll lay out the argument fairly. Then, we'll dive into 3 huge flaws that critics have flagged. And finally, we'll step back and look at the bigger picture this whole debate opens up. Okay, first things first. Before we get into any critiques, let's make sure we're all on the same page. What is the actual thought experiment that's at the center of all this?
It really boils down to this simple contrast. The idea is that scientific truths, like gravity or E equals mc squared, they're just objective facts about the universe. Anyone, anywhere would eventually figure them out again. But religious truths? Well, the argument paints them as being totally dependent on their specific books. So if you get rid of the Bible or the Quran, the beliefs just vanish forever. It's a really sharp distinction, but as we're about to see, it's maybe a little too simple.
And that brings us right to the first massive problem. Critics say the whole setup is built on a really shaky foundation, a basic logical mistake. I mean, think about this for a second. The answer is obvious, right? Of course not. World War II happened. The event itself is a reality, completely separate from our books about it. And this is where the thought experiment starts to wobble. Sure, future historians would have no way of knowing the specifics, who fought who, the exact dates, but that doesn't erase the actual event.
And this is what critics call proving too much. You see, if you take this burning books logic and apply it consistently, well, you don't just get rid of religion, you obliterate everything. All of our recorded history, our legal systems, our greatest works of literature and philosophy. I mean, all of it suddenly becomes not real just because the books can burn. It's a total own goal. The argument accidentally attacks the very idea of human culture itself.
So here's the bottom line for this first flaw. The argument makes a classic category error. It's confusing the map with the territory. It treats the physical book as the thing itself, instead of what it is, a record of a claimed reality. It doesn't matter if you're talking about a historical event like Caesar crossing the Rubicon or a claimed religious event. Burning the report doesn't and can't change whether the event actually happened.
All right, on to the second major flaw. And honestly, this one is fascinating because it takes the original argument and flips it completely upside down. It really makes you question what's fragile and what's actually built to last. This counter-argument is just brilliant. It says, hold on a second, advanced science, the kind that gives us quantum physics, is an incredibly fragile thing. It needs stable societies, a ton of money, schools, global collaboration. It's a rare historical achievement. Religion, on the other hand, that springs up everywhere all the time. Why? Because it comes from the deepest parts of the human condition. As long as people are around, we're going to be asking, why are we here? What's the point? What's right and wrong? So you see, religion isn't just something that lives on a page. It lives in these fundamental human questions. Philosophers call this natural revelation. The idea is that the universe itself, just by existing, makes us wonder. You don't need a specific book to look up at the stars and ask the big questions. And critics argue those questions would come roaring back, no matter how many libraries you burn down.
Now we get to the third and maybe the most philosophically devastating critique of the whole thought experiment. It's about a classic logical fallacy that's hiding in plain sight.
So what is circular reasoning? It's basically when your argument is, I'm right because I say I'm right. You're not actually proving anything, you're just starting with the answer you want to end up with. It's a logical loop that goes nowhere.
And that's exactly what critics say is happening here. For this whole scenario to work, for the religious books to never come back, you have to start by assuming God is silent. You have to assume God isn't going to act again. No new revelations, no miracles, nothing. The argument basically bakes its conclusion right into the starting recipe.
This question just blows the whole thing up. I mean, the entire point of a theistic God is that he's an active being who can and does interact with the world. So setting up a thought experiment where you forbid him from doing that, well, that's not an argument against God's existence. It's just you describing a world where you've already decided he doesn't act. The thought experiment doesn't disprove theism, it just restates atheism in a more complicated way. So let's zoom out a bit. This whole thought experiment forces us into a very narrow box about what counts as evidence. It basically says, if you can't repeat it in a lab, it doesn't count. But that completely ignores other valid ways of thinking and knowing.
For centuries, people who believe in God have presented evidence, but it usually falls into one of these two buckets. You've got philosophical arguments that use pure logic and what we observe about the universe, like the fact that it had a beginning, or that the laws of physics seem perfectly dialed in for life to exist. Then you have historical claims, which are based on testimony and events, kind of like building a case in a courtroom. If you just ignore these types of evidence, you're not really engaging with the actual claims being made.
And here's another twist. Some philosophers point out that science itself is built on a foundation of big assumptions. Assumptions that, funnily enough, make a lot of sense if you believe in God. I mean, science has to assume the universe is orderly, that its laws don't change, and that our minds can actually understand it. Science doesn't prove these things, it takes them on faith. And critics argue that believing in a rational creator is actually the best reason to expect a rational, understandable universe to begin with.
At the end of the day, maybe science and religion aren't even trying to do the same thing. You could say that religion is trying to tell you why there's a game being played at all, while science is trying to figure out the rules of that game so we can play it better. They're asking different questions, and they have different standards for what counts as an answer.
So let's wrap this up. We've seen how this viral thought experiment really doesn't hold up. First, its logic about burning books is flawed. It would destroy all of history, not just religion. Second, it gets human nature completely backward. It's advanced science that's fragile, while the big questions that lead to faith are incredibly resilient. And finally, and most importantly, it's a circular argument. It only works because it assumes its own conclusion right from the very beginning.
So that leaves us with this final, much bigger question. When we're asking about ultimate reality, about meaning and purpose, what kind of evidence are we even looking for? Does the answer have to fit inside a test tube? Or do the biggest questions in life require a totally different kind of investigation? Now that is something worth thinking about.